Good afternoon, ladies and gents. It's the 27th of May, 2024. This is my very first YouTube video. I'll apologise in advance if it's all over the place, but I'm sure I'll get the hang of it, or maybe not. Unfortunately for you, you're only going to hear my voice and no video content on this session, as it's just an introduction to the channel, so bear with me. Ladies and gents, this is going to be a no bullshit channel, getting straight to the point as we sift through the minefield of misinformation and obstacles out there. After a few months contemplating on whether I should or shouldn't kick off this channel, here we are. This is not normally my thing. I don't like the sound of my own voice, and no doubt I'm going to have some very different views on all sorts of subjects and matters compared to, let's say, the average Joe out there. The reason for the change of heart is because most of you should know by now that on the 24th of February 2022, Russia decided to cross the Ukrainian border and cause unnecessary shit and suffering to thousands of people. I've been tracking that war daily and watching numerous channels on YouTube and following real events almost in real time. As you'll know, tracking real events and finding the truth can be challenging across various social media platforms. But over the years, after different sort of methods of analysis and filtering techniques, I'm at a place where I have a fairly good understanding now of what's going on around the world in terms of these threats. But putting that aside, the quick introduction and why I've decided to kick off this channel. It seems that the events that have happened and continue to unfold around the world don't really seem to be sort of bothering or concerning many people here in the UK at the moment, or over the last couple of years, to be honest. And why should it? Unlike some, we don't have bombs dropping on our homes, tanks rolling down the streets, or civilians being murdered or mutilated by an invading force. And all those things we currently take for granted are not affected yet. Hence the why should we be bothered attitude. I was in the armed forces a long time ago, and I remember being on a sort of survival exercise on Dartmoor, only for it to be cut short because we were placed on standby as President Bush announced the start of Desert Shield and the Desert Storm air campaign in Iraq back in 1990. But unfortunately for me, I didn't see any active service due to an injury and being discharged a year or so later. But one thing the armed forces instills into you is that survival instinct, an awareness of conflict, an understanding, or an awareness on how fragile the rest of the world can be and how quickly things can change, kind of giving you a set of sort of tools and a different mindset really to better understand such circumstances, and an introduction to what I call the real world. Anyway, enough about that. Let's talk about the channel. I've spent a long time, many hours, days, weeks, and months following what most would consider doom and gloom. I track conflict, but not all wars. I'm not a war or scaremonger or a sadist or out looking for pointless aggression and hyped up news because I've nothing else better to do. But what I am interested in is any conflict that could affect me and my family here in the UK. I just have to ask myself this question. If something bad happened, such as a shit hitting the fan scenario, my missus and kids are going to come up to me and they'll be stood there in front of me asking me, what should we be doing? I've pictured that image a lot recently, more so than ever before, to be honest, because there's one thing I cannot and will not allow, and that is for me to be stood there as a figure of responsibility, and in front of the very people that rely on me, saying to my missus and kids, sorry guys, but I have no idea what we should be doing. And that, quite frankly, is not going to be happening. So not sure about you guys, but I people watch sometimes, meaning that, you know, I could be sort of sat there in town or on a train or out shopping and I people watch. I know that sounds a bit weird, but what I mean by that is that I try and sort of work out what people are about. And I do the same when I'm sort of socializing sometimes and just sort of generally around people. And I've found over the last, I don't know what, 15, 20 years, I've identified two main groups of people. I actually try and talk to people I don't even know, just out of curiosity, and just understand where they're coming from. It's always easier, really, to determine that information from a complete stranger. Now, before I explain these two categories of people, I'm going to guess that there may, there may be some viewers here that might feel offended. Don't be offended, as there's nothing better or worse between these two types of people. It's just life. You'll find that most of you will fit into both of these categories or have at least done so during some part of your life. You have what I call the sheep. Yeah, and you might have another name for them. But these people make up around 85% of the population. They are part of the system. They follow the rules, some to the letter. Then there's what I call the shepherds, making up the other 15%. Those percentages are based on employment statistics and taxpayers' metrics, which is information that's provided by the UK government. And these metrics will become apparent in a minute. The sheep are, what should we say? They're people who are part of the sort of system. To be honest, we're all part of the system, but some choose to let it rule their lives and others don't. The choice we'll all probably make at some point. The system relies heavily on the sheep as well as others, but more so on the sheep, as they cater for 85% of the system in ensuring that the engine continues to run, keeping the country going, and in return, the system will look after them. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this category of people, and without them, the country would pretty much fall to its knees anyway. These guys want a stable and easy life. They want to know where they stand. They want to know what's going on from one day to the next, week in, week out. But the reality is, so many sheep aren't even happy with that way of life. Getting up in the morning, going to work in a job that most people don't even want to do, coming home, having dinner, I don't know, watching some shit on TV, going to the gym or the pub, walking the dog, and then off to bed. And then when they get up in the morning, off they go again. And for what? Some security, stability, structure, even happiness. And we long for those weekends to turn up, don't we? Just to have 48 hours with our families and an escape from the previous 5 days of bullshit, to be honest. But the weekend lands and lands on your doorsteps, and then off to the shops we go, or to the pub, or we sit at home watching TV whilst mulling over a takeaway of some sorts, or off visiting family and friends, taking a bloody dog for another walk, or watching some more shit on TV, and on it goes. And that's why we work, isn't it? So that we can survive and just get through life. Because nowadays, actually being part of the system is a game of survival in itself. So for the engine to keep running, the government has to ensure that there's at least 80% of the population in work, whether that be working for yourself or working for a company. And why? Because as long as you're working, you'll be paying tax, and tax is exactly what keeps the engine running. Let me just give you a blunt but true fact here. Some years ago, I was working in London. The train home was delayed, so I sat in a pub with many other commuters just waiting for the next train out. And here in the UK, everyone was moaning about people from other countries coming over to the UK and causing problems. I think at the time the British public were finger pointing at the Polish on their way over to work. Anyway, this geezer all suited up, sort of sat at my table, and we got talking, and he said to me, "Oh, what do you think to all of this news about the Polish taking the jobs, the houses, the places in schools, blah, blah, blah?" I said to him, "It doesn't affect me, so I don't give a shit." Then I asked him what his thoughts were, and do you know what he said to me? He said in one sentence that I'll never forget. He said, "I work for the government as a civil servant, and it doesn't matter what the colour of your skin is, nor the language that comes out of your mouth. As long as you can work in this country, that's all that matters." So since that conversation, some 10 years or more ago, every time I see, I don't know, on the TV, everyone moaning about the immigrants or immigration and all the rest of it, I remember that sentence. And why am I talking about this? Because it's important to understand what the UK engine is first. Because once you understand that, you will better understand the types of people around you, why they say and do the things that they do. And you may even sit there, like I did, having a word with yourself at some point. Types of people and their behaviours is important to understand, certainly as a prepper, as well as understanding the structure and system that's supposed to support this country. When you guys see on mainstream news about the rubber dinghies coming across the channel full of immigrants, what do you see? Let me tell you what I see. I see the UK government letting the immigrants come into the country. They're all male between the ages of 20 and 35. No women, no children. You might see the odd woman and child in the boat, but they've been put there just for the media to capture. When they reach the UK shores, women and children won't be putting money into the pot. Instead, they'll be taking it out. Many of them don't have passports, but all have a mobile phone. Maybe the UK government are taking their passports off them and giving them a mobile phone before putting them in boats on the French beaches with an agreement that they can have UK citizenship or their passports back when they get to the UK, have been processed and have worked and paid into the pot for a period of years. All speculation, I know, but you can see why people start to see events sort of happening from, let's say, different angles. Remember, during Brexit, we lost 350,000 both EU and non-EU workers who all went home in fear of being kicked out. Then we lost around another 170,000 more workers during the pandemic who went back to their own countries to look after their own families. Now that is 500,000 or 500,000 shortfall of people not working and therefore resulting in a shortfall in tax. Do any of you really think that this country could not stop those boats from crossing the channel? Or coming up with a system in terms of technology to detect those boats before entering UK waters? We or the government need that sort of workforce back in this country, and that is the way the engine works. So to my point, as long as they are or you are working and you're paying tax, and with that you're keeping the engine going, and that is what keeps this country afloat. Now, just quickly, let's not forget the shepherds. They're a slightly different breed of character. They may be running their own businesses, probably failed a lot of things, but normally prepared to get up and give it another go. They're more likely to break the rules, shall we say, not necessarily always following the rules because they have other ideas. Those kinds of people make good leaders. They're more likely to have come from a different background, shall we say, possibly a less stable background commonly found amongst sheep, and therefore have a different upbringing. They may have gone through harder times, making them a little more robust, and therefore sometimes better sort of candidates to get through troubled times and survive. What I mean by this is that a shepherd has probably made life difficult for themselves, breaking some of the rules put there by the system, not always conforming, and therefore self-creating obstacles and challenges for themselves. Now, you're probably thinking, what the fuck is he yapping on about? I said a couple of minutes ago that the system relies heavily on these people to keep the country going, and in return, the sheep will expect the system to look after them. An example of the sheep being looked after by the system that would be during a pandemic. Many people lost their jobs, businesses went under, and people were simply out of work because they kept the engine running. They expected the system to help them out. Financial caps on goods and lowered prices, caps on bills, additional funding and grants for businesses, furlough on salaries for individuals, and the list goes on. And that was a taste of the shit hitting the fan scenario, I suppose. But what I'm trying to say here is, if there was a serious SHTF scenario here in the UK, and at least 80% of the population would look up to the government for support, advice, help, and most worryingly, instructions. Kind of like a sort of an expectation, really, after all the hours you do and the taxes you contribute to the pot. If the shit hits the fan, I want looking after. But, and here's the problem, if the shit really hit the fan here in the UK, meaning millions of people are affected due to some kind of catastrophic event, then the government are only ever going to be in the position really to help and support a lot lesser number than the 85% of 69 million of the UK population. That's not to say that the pandemic wasn't a serious event, as approximately 227,000 people died as a result of that infection. But I've tried to, let's say, bring up certain subjects in conversation with people in the pub. or some other social environment regarding the conflicts unfolding in different parts of the world, just to see, what their take is on those matters, or just to see what everyone else is sort of thinking. The start of the conversation kind of kicks off. Most will just talk about what they've heard on the radio or seen on mainstream and or social media platforms. You'll find that the sheep will be the category of people having that conversation because they're easily influenced by the system and will talk about, what they have been told via social media platforms and mainstream news. However, once I start talking about the threats to the UK and its population, I've found that you'll get some blank stares, you'll get people shut down, and others will immediately change the subject, which, to be fair, is just a defense mechanism. Either they don't want to talk about it, in which case they should just say so, or they have no idea or understanding what you're actually saying to them. Some look in disbelief, as if you've completely lost the plot. There will be various reasons for this. Many people aren't tracking the wars on a daily basis and probably not tracking them at all. And that will be because they just don't believe that these wars and conflicts will affect them. If they're not reading or watching it on mainstream TV or on social media, then it's just not happening. Those platforms will only tell the viewers what they want them to know and not what's really going on. And there's a completely plausible reason for this. The government will not want to be causing any level of panic because with panic comes chaos. And the two together, all combined, is a hard situation to manage. So to my point being, first and foremost, I just want to explain and emphasize how serious these conflicts are right now and how they might affect you and your families at home. I mean, it's a catch-22 situation really for the government right now because, they obviously know what's going on because they're making all the decisions, but they can't tell you about it without, possible fallout in the country. If they tell the people that World War III has started and we're going to war, then with that, you'll have panic. The sheep will instantly look up to the government for help, support, and advice, and all the rest of it. And the government would have to potentially deal with a kind of uncontrollable situation on their hands. So instead, they're going to just drip feed the masses and the UK population with sort of snippets of information, just to let you know that those conflicts that many believe that will not affect them, all of a sudden might. Only recently, the UK government are now sort of talking about mandatory national service. Now, if that isn't some kind of sign, and some of you are still not believing what's going on, then just run along with your happy lives and good luck, pretty much. Whilst we're on the subject of categories of people, there are certain behaviours to mention here as well that sort of also important to understand. Not sure how many of you have heard of the term normality bias or normalcy bias. Long story short, it's a cognitive bias that leads people to disbelieve or minimize threat warnings. Consequently, individuals will underestimate the likelihood of a disaster when it might affect them. This is really important to mention because it's a bias that can result in determining on whether somebody lives or dies. When I mentioned earlier about trying to sort of have these conversations with people in social circles and they try to avoid the conversation or just change the subject, this behavior is similar to normalcy bias. You either simply won't accept the fact that the shit could sort of hit the fan and affect your whole world, or you change the subject because you just don't want to hear such things. Another behavior to mention here is for those that adopt what is known as the ostrich effect, which is kind of similar, but it's a tendency to avoid dangerous or negative information by simply closing oneself off from the information, like burying your head in the sand and just hoping it's all going to blow over. Again, a dangerous behavior. So if any of you feel that you can relate to these behaviors, can I advise you to do one of two things? The last thing I want to be doing here is scaring anyone, causing anxiety, stress, depression, or similar conditions as a result of the information I'm sharing. If the subject of war and conflict, shall we say, especially war theatres that could affect you and your family, cause you any sort of health issues, then please do not watch any more of my videos on YouTube going forward. And I would advise you to stay away from similar channels providing the public with similar content. However, to try and help combat some of these worries people may have if they choose to continue watching these videos, I'm going to be sharing with you sort of over the next few videos my sort of journey over the last 1 or 2 years, and how I've kind of got around dealing with that stress. I will tell you exactly, what you need to know for planning and preparing yourself. And although the information will have a sort of UK feel to it, many of the principles can apply to anyone. I won't be talking about matters I feel won't affect you. As I've said, this is going to be a no bullshit channel. I'm only interested in the well-being of people around me. And if I can share that information out to the wider audience, then that is a massive plus. I am not someone with loads of money. I don't have access to money. And as you may have gathered, I may fall into that category of the shepherd, shall we say, and not really relying on the system, as it were. Of course, that makes life a little bit challenging for me. And when it comes to prepping, my preps or the actual mission to get myself prepared is kind of challenging, shall we say. So the advice I pass on to you guys will be coming from someone who doesn't have access to a couple of acres of land, does not have a small boat or camper van at their sort of disposal, and cannot dip into a big pot of money and purchase a few months of food and survival aids. First and foremost, I just want to make sure that the information you receive from me is meaningful and, more importantly, useful to you. I had many concerns a couple of years ago when Russia sort of went into the Ukraine. Many more concerns when people started mentioning and talking about nuclear weapons and all-out war in Europe in general. Now, however, I want to say my mind isn't necessarily at peace, but my mind is in a better place. First and foremost, we need to understand what is actually going on around the continent and the world. Then assess that information and decide on whether or not any of it can sort of affect and impact you and your family. As mentioned, I'm new to prepping, so I will be sharing my journey with you guys as I move forward. I will share my challenges, my failures and successes, and because that's exactly what life's about. If you're going to watch these videos on this channel, then for some of you, you're going to have to take that bubble off your head and maybe pull your heads out of your asses and just open your eyes a little to the real world. I want to pull people away from this normality bias attitude because it's dangerous for you and for those that rely on you. And I want to give you a platform where you can, at the very least, understand the situation that could, and I say could in capital letters, could start unfolding here in the UK, because I don't know, just like you don't know, and many of the people on other channels don't know, the real facts. They don't know the real decisions being made by the government, intelligence and military. They don't know when things are likely to happen. So all we can do is kind of make those assessments based on what we see and hear from other areas. Now, if you are seeing the physical movement of military assets and military postures changing around Europe, then that's hard to hide. You can't, you can't hide that. You can't hide the movement of those assets. So therefore, we've got to stand there and go, well, why is this happening? Okay, so there's only so much that they can keep from us, and it will get to a point where they can't hide anymore from us, and then they'll start talking about dealing with how to deal with emergency situations and whether there's going to be national service and blah 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 blah. So all I'm trying to say is, again, I'm not scaremongering. I'm just going to be logical, and I'm just going to speak, from the mind, and just sort of based on logic, shall we say. Now, as I mentioned, I am new to prepping. I was aware of preppers years ago when I remember seeing sort of content on YouTube about how our American friends were sort of stockpiling food, water, medications in their sort of basements and pantries. and all kinds of supplies in preparation for certain events. Now, I'm not sure about you guys, but I used to sort of sit there thinking to myself, what are the Americans planning for? What do they know that we don't? And back then, the conflict that's happening today wasn't happening then. There was conflict if we're going back to, the Iraq War and things like that. But that wasn't on this scale. A piece of advice here: if you're watching any of those other prepping channels, don't dismiss what you sort of hear on those US or Canadian channels. They've been doing this prepping business for many, many years. They have a continent that spans many different terrains, enduring many different weather patterns. And with that, they have learned how to sort of adapt and survive. Of course, they're going to try and sell you sort of products and kit and food and anything prepping, but then that's business. Here in the UK, it's smaller and we do things differently. But when it comes to prepping, we still, to be fair, have a lot to learn. Now, I can see exactly why, they've been preparing. And unfortunately for us here in the UK, we're way, way behind. In fact, the mentality here amongst the British people is somewhat blasé. I would urge anyone that is listening to this video to go and check a couple of the other YouTube videos, both British, US, and European, and just see what information they have. Many of those guys are in the know, but the US, to me, seem to be a little bit ahead. And you'll find hundreds of useful videos on sort of real-time events unfolding across the globe, as well as a shed load of prepping content across all of those platforms in the US, UK, and Europe. And whilst we're talking about preppers, everyone's got their own interpretation of what a prepper is or what one should be, and even how they would categorize a prepper. As I've said, here in the UK, the general population are completely clouded by other things. And I'm just going to put this out there as well. I've even come across preppers that are normality bias. So what the fuck is that about? To be honest, as I've mentioned earlier, these are defense mechanisms. Either some preppers will not or cannot believe that the shit could really hit the fan. There's nothing wrong with this, especially if you're British and of this era, to be honest, because we haven't really experienced a full-blown SHTF scenario, especially when we're talking about war and conflict. First and foremost, there is no right or wrong way to prep. Everyone's different. You'll have access to resources I might not. I might have skills you don't. You might live in a flat on your own and have only yourself to sort of prepare for, and others might live on a farm with a family of 8. There are a basic set of skills out there across many online resources covering, the foundations, as it were, that you will need to survive different situations. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, no one is going to be 100% prepared for all eventualities. And that will be for many reasons. The lack of experience, whether that be survival skills, the lack of funds, and not being able to purchase a shitload of kit. Some of you will say that you don't have time for this, and that's fine until the shit hits the fan. Some of you might have medical conditions that simply prevent you from, doing some of those things needed to prepare and survive. The reality here is that if, and I say if with, big capital letters, because what do I know? But if the shit hits the fan, then how many of you are going to be prepared? It's a difficult question to ask when we don't know what the SHTF event sort of looks like. No one actually believes that anything's going to happen to them here in the UK because they think they're sort of too far away from any sort of conflict zone. They don't and won't believe that a nationwide cyber attack on this country is likely. Most people know enough, I suppose, about IT to get them through their everyday lives on social media, and that's about it. They'll be able to ping, I don't know, emails out and use IT to support their, I don't know, job roles at work and at home. So why should they even begin to understand what a cyber attack would mean? The same attitude will be adopted here. Yes, cyber attacks are happening, but unless it affects them directly, then it doesn't matter. I'll be talking about cyber attacks in other videos um, for anyone that's interested in that subject. I know it can be a bit boring because it's IT, but look out for it over the coming weeks. The same goes for other possible events happening sort of here in the UK. And unless it hits them square in the face, then who gives a damn? That seems to be the attitude right now. That's it. I don't know any other way of putting it. No one around me, certainly, I don't know about you guys, and I hope it's different for you guys, but just no one seems to be interested, concerned, worried, aware, or anything. But let me just give you a wake-up call. This is not a case of if, but when. And when it does, so many people are going to get caught out. There will be, without a doubt, panic buying. And some of you will be amongst them. There will be the loss of services, systems, and support in areas, and some of you will be affected by that, just like me and my family will. But the difference is, for me, that I will be prepared to the best of my ability, because I'm not, I will not sort of be the partner or the dad stood in front of my children whilst they're looking up to me and saying, Dad, what are we going to be doing? Or are we going to be all right? And me stood there with no answers. Nah, that's not happening. So my point here is not to be a scaremongering, which is exactly what some of the trolls will be accusing me of shortly. I don't give a shit about them. What I do care about is making you aware of possible threats to you and your families. If this is a bad thing, then get off the channel. I'm not here to have friendly chats about how well or bad your day is going. We are way past that now. We need to be paying attention and leave those conversations until you're out with your mates at the pub. So listen, as I continue to track the wars and conflicts around the world, I want to share some of that information out there to the viewers. I'll try and get an update out to you all on a daily basis, or as soon as there's critical information to present. I'll do my utmost to ensure that all content and information has been verified, and where possible, I provide links out to those sources for you. I'm based in the UK. I'm not participating in any active military exercises. I've not been into any of the conflict zones that we'll be talking about. But don't get me wrong, I have thought about packing up my kit and joining, one of the legions across Europe, just to do my bit. So the information I gather is really relied upon others people's sort of information. I'm going to say up front that there is a lot of false information out there on the internet. Pictures and videos have been, I don't know, manipulated to portray something else other than the truth. And during these conflicts and news feeds, there is plenty of misinformation sort of going on across both mainstream and social media. So keep an open mind and just make up your own opinions on what you sort of see and read. Finally, before I finish this introduction, I just want to, well, I don't want to be wasting anyone's time. So I'm just going to provide you with an overview of the content that I'll be providing, with an emphasis on sort of how these events could affect you, and you can just make up your own mind on whether it's for you or not. I'll be covering the war in the Ukraine with Russia, because it's the closest to home and presents the more likely threats. I will only be hitting on main events, and I won't be talking about sort of how many soldiers have been killed in action, nor will I be sort of sharing data on how many vehicles and hardware has been destroyed or damaged. There are guys out there on YouTube that specifically provide that information to you if you're interested. We'll talk about the war in the Middle East, especially around Israel and its surrounding countries such as Yemen, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. Mainly they're focusing on the impact that war could have, sort of on us here in the UK and other parts of the world. We'll cover the tensions currently bubbling away in the background in Asia. This will include China and Taiwan, the Philippines and Japan, as well as the tensions between North and South Korea if any of that unfolds. There will be heavy focus over the coming weeks on the risks, threats, and vulnerabilities to the UK as a nation from external forces, including the breakdown of supply chains, such as imports and exports, We'll look at the attacks on European countries and how that would affect us here in the UK. And then more importantly, any possible attack on the UK. We'll discuss long-term power outages and EMPs. That's a big threat, and consequences can be dire. We'll look at NBC, or nuclear, biological, and nuclear warfare, as well as radioactive facts and figures, myths and truths. We'll cover, or I'll make sure I'll provide you with frequent news and updates on European countries' preparedness and movements, such as across Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Romania, Moldova, Finland, and Belarus, as well as other countries if they're sort of drawn into the mix. And I will be talking about prepping and preparedness, covering subjects on food, water, medication, shelter, security, protection, hygiene, and more, just like many of the other prepping channels. And of course, what I do to keep myself sort of infantry aware and military fit. These subjects at the time of this video will be my primary focus and interest, but they may vary as events around the world develop and change. Just want to say thank you for listening to me and my first but short introductory video, and I hope that you guys can get something useful out of this channel. I know to some that this might sound a bit full on, but I'm just going to be getting straight to the point because both you and I don't have time to piss about, quite frankly. Just before I finish, my motto is get yourselves military fit and infantry aware. Now, this doesn't mean run off and join the armed forces, although it was the best thing I ever done. But getting yourself sort of military fit is self-explanatory. Move the military bit, and if you like, but just keeping yourself fit in normal walks of life is just good, regardless of what's happening. But it goes without saying, during times of challenge, if you struggle, I don't know, walking to the shops or up and down stairs, then you're going to be of no use to anyone, let alone yourself. And being infantry aware is more about skills picked up whilst in the military. Skills, you don't abide by in sort of civilian life. Being able to survive without relying on the system is a start. So surviving in areas of, sort of areas and locations sort of found here in the UK. I'm based in the UK, so I've kind of got to base my content sort of in this country. It's not to say that I'm just focusing on sort of British viewers. It's, a lot of these concepts and this information is going to apply to anyone. But I will be looking at both sort of urban and rural settings because the two are very different landscapes. And that for me, enough of my rubbish, and I'm off.